So the recording should be started. Welcome everybody to the next user group event. I am Alec Harrison, one of the co-organizers of all these groups. If you belong to any of these groups or just saw a post on LinkedIn, welcome. Feel free to join any one of these. We try to basically have at least a once a month meeting. Next month, we are planning to do a recap of what's being announced at Build, kind of what we're excited about there. So just to call out too, I believe next week is Microsoft Build. So if you aren't going to be there in person, which if you are, you probably already have those plans. But if you're not, you can tune in online. Most sessions, there's actually more sessions online than there are in person. And I believe there's more time zones too. So depending on where you're tuning in from, there might be more sessions to better suit where you're at. So check that out. It's just build.microsoft.com. You can sign up there for a free account, and they have their entire session catalog there. So you can kind of decide what's new in development that really gets you excited, and maybe what, ignore the stuff you don't really care about. And then if you do add it to your backpack, the majority of stuff at Build is recorded, so you can also review it or watch it later. So if you just go in there, add it, you don't necessarily have to watch it when it's live. A lot of the stuff is able to be reviewed later. So I was just telling the group, the working title of Open Source Projects Showcase was kind of what I started with. The goal of this, I did a slight rename for other groups, recalling it Borrow, Build, and Beyond, Accelerating Your AI Journey with Open Source Projects, because I think that's kind of the lens we should look at this is, how do I basically start getting AI solutions at work with doing as little work as possible, right? Like everybody loves being the person who did something super cool, especially if you didn't have to do any work. So that's kind of where this started off with. Was in my day job, we actually started with the AI search demo, and then we rolled that into a client-specific product that is serving clients in production today. So sometimes with AI and other things, it can be kind of scary too, of like where to get started, how much sunk costs do I need to actually get an AI solution off the ground. And I think with the data security and data privacy in Azure, security wise, you shouldn't be afraid. Use normal security best practices, right? Like put it behind your SSO or your login so that it's not just open to the public web, at least not without security. But then past that, just get started. A lot of these solutions cost something like, I think it's like less than $200 a month ish, which can sound like a lot, but if you just deploy it for like a demo or to talk with, or if you have a Microsoft account like with your Visual Studio Enterprise, that more than covers a lot of these kind of use cases and applications. So you can deploy them, play with them, see what's going on, try to understand what's going on, and then delete them, and you're back off to the races. So the idea behind this is going to be kind of a laid back presentation. We'll just showcase some different stuff. I'll put links in the chat if you want to check them out after the fact. But yeah, go ahead and get started. So for the first one I have is the AI search demo. This is a search demo that basically just shows you how to get data, your PDFs, JSON, any sort of file format, index it, and get it into AI search. So it has a simple application that calls their app server orchestrator. In this one, it's using container apps, but it can basically be any sort of front end that you care about, which will then use Azure AI search to query your data sources. So it'll show you how a basic vectorization works, how to query that, how to get data back. And then it uses Azure OpenAI to use semantic, or it uses hybrid search, I believe. So semantic and keyword search to search your documents. That GitHub repo is here. I'll point that there. The easiest way to get started with this one and a lot of these is to open them up into a code space. So if you have a GitHub account, I'm not signed into mine at the moment, you can actually just roll this up in a code space, do AZD up, and then it'll walk you through creating all of this. If we go down to the deployment steps, there is a cheaper path too. So if you go to deploying, there is a optional. So you can either do a low cost deployment, or you can do the deployment with a free trial Azure account. So if you're trying to optimize costs, or maybe you're doing this outside of work, definitely probably worth looking into. Or if you already have some AI resources out there, you can point it to existing resources. And then if we go to, it'll tell you how to deploy it again, how to do updates. There is a, around here, there we go. So this project out of the box, they have on a lot of these the pre-built out Azure pricing calculator. One thing you will notice is there is some guessing. So if you look here, we're guessing 30,000 semantic queries. We're guessing 1,000 tokens. A lot of these are estimated just to try to get a rough idea and to show you like, okay, well, when we embed here, we're going to pay about a penny for that. Your mileage may vary, right? If you're hitting this a lot harder, you'll see a little bit higher. If you're not hitting it this hard, you won't see this much cost monthly. This is because AI search is typically the most costly of all of them too. They don't like to build samples on the free tier. What I heard from somebody at one point was the free tier didn't used to have the compute and power. I don't think that's the case anymore. So you can totally try to build these on the free tier AI search as well. See what happens. If you run into issues, you can always up it. The first basic tier is 72 and some change a month dollars. So that is why these costs are a little bit on the higher end. If you can get by with a free AI search instance, this goes down to 0. And then you can do the math of minus 101. Your cost is like $11 a month to run this thing. And you're not always going to be embedding data, right? You're only going to embed data when you add more. So again, a lot of these samples are fairly cheap to run, fairly cheap to do. If we go back here to the PowerPoint, I have this deployed as well. So this is the chat with your data. There's two different ways to chat with data in Azure. There is the ask a question, and then there's the chat. The difference I would equate it to is ask a question is like if you ask somebody, we can do with system prompts to give somebody some context, but message to message, it's like a clean slate. There's no memory between. There's no parameter to pass messages through. So you just be like if you walked up to somebody on the street and said, hey, I'm going to ask you a question. They'll do their best to answer it. And then you went further down the street to somebody you didn't see the previous conversation and you just asked them a random question. They don't have any context to the previous conversation. They'll do their best guess to answer it, but they're not going to have context, whereas chat will have context to the previous messages, and we'll see that here. There's a few other things we can mess with here too. So if you're trying to test out temperature, seed, minimum search score, minimum ranker score, all that sort of stuff, we can play with all these gears and kind of change what we want to see. We can override the prompt template, which is the system message. So we can mess with that too here. Clear chats. And then Microsoft, in that repo, they have some fake like HR documents and some roles and responsibilities, basically like a very fake high level organization. If you go ahead and say like what's included in my health benefit, we'll let that roll. So the cool part about this is everybody with AI is always afraid that AI is going to give you a weird answer out of the box. This gives you an answer of what we're looking, what's not included in my health plan. We can see here it actually cites the Northwind Health Plus, which is not standard. That'd be what's above standard. So even if I don't care or don't trust AI, I have what would be my document, so my benefits information at my company in this specific example, and I can go look it up. So AI will do its best guess to answer it, but if I don't trust it, I can then go to the source of truth documentation. This is pretty good when you're rolling out in an organization trying to build trust with AI. There is also parameters here that you can do. I don't think, yeah. So it's not here, but there's also API parameters behind the scenes where you can set like a strictness. Temperature helps with that a little bit. So temperature will control randomness. So if you think hallucination is the model trying to basically answer your question, and if the data isn't quite there, so it can just copy and paste it, it has to do some connections behind the scenes. That's kind of how LLMs work, where it's like taking the understanding. Temperature can basically make it more or less creative, where it can, try to come up with stuff, or put it down to 0, where it's basically just saying, hey, I'm a glorified search engine, right? I can search and copy and paste your answer back, but I can't do anything creative. The same thing with strictness is there too. That's a different parameter you can mess with of how strict do you want it to be locked down to your source of truth documentation? Do you want it to say, okay, well, I believe it's a 1 through 5 scale. 3 would be like the, hey, whatever you find, just answer my question. 5 is super strict, 1 is super loose, or vice versa. But you can play with that scale of your organization to see, what level of comfortability are you having on, well, try to use our data as the primary source and then fall back to another one. And you can even put stuff like that in your system prompt. You'll notice here too, there's also follow-up questions that it suggests. For the real life use cases I've done, I haven't found a ton of value in that because we've been mostly helping people try to solve problems. And it's been like a, hey, here's my problem. What's the answer? Or what document do I need to look at to find this? So they just get an answer and then they go on with their day. There hasn't been unless the model says, I don't know, which is, again, another safety control we have to say, if it's not in our data in that particular case, we don't want to necessarily try to guess or just make up something. That's the only time we kind of see users coming back. And we kind of built a basic feedback mechanism, which would be the one shortcoming I'd say this has, is having some sort of basic mechanism to say, hey, what are people getting back from the AI model? And do they find it valuable? It also helps for hallucination too, if you're logging what the model gives back. So you can see, hey, somebody got a weird answer, and then maybe you can go back to your source of truth documentation and either tweak that or put an answer in the model to say, hey, we're seeing a lot of gaps of the data set we have here. Here's what we're going to do to fill it. Or, hey, this specific question is giving really weird answers. Maybe we go and explicitly put into the model through the embedding of, hey, here's what you should be answering in this case. If you do want the follow-up questions, though, you can do that. Same sort of thing. It'll ask the question, follow up, give you your citation. So this one kind of spans across 2 different pages. Just at a high level, when you chunk a document, typically you have a little bit of overlap, so it can kind of preview into the next chunk or across pages. And that's what's kind of being showcased here is we're getting some citations across pages. We think that page 71 is more relevant, but we also point people back towards the end of page 70. Any questions for that one? I'd say the use cases here kind of like a support bot. So like kind of think tier 1 support, or maybe trying to, if your organization has a huge amount of data of physical like PDFs or Word docs, blob, JSON, this can span huge amounts of data and make it easily searchable for your company. It also could be used for self-service. So instead of having to, maybe call somebody or I've even had requests to put this over developer documentation. So you could even try to do that as well, to have like a self-service piece of this to say, hey, go check out our stuff. The other thing, so this is the supporting content. This comes back in the citation, so we can see it only talked about the first 2. That's because the relevance score was high enough that these 2 it thought was relevant. This one might be semi-relevant, but the score is low enough. That's one thing you could look into too. If you see people getting weird answers coming back, you can come in and see the supporting content. There's also the thought process. So you can ask it to give back the chain of thought of why it's doing what it's doing. For certain industries and in Europe, I believe that is required for a lot of these use cases, is you do need to have the chain of thought, especially if it's making determinations based on somebody or something, just to show that you're trying to alleviate bias and all that sort of stuff. But this also can be kicked back. So the next one we have, the AI Search Proxy Project. If you run any sort of user group or event, this one's kind of fun. So this one it looks really light. Put this here. Before the AI services were really robust, this service was really nice because it used to help you with round robining at like events. So what it would do is basically just round robin all your requests, because context limit and API per minute calls used to be your biggest bounding factor. Microsoft has now made a lot of those not as big of a deal. I think I had a 100-person workshop, somewhere between 50 and 100, on a single Azure OpenAI instance, and we didn't hit any sort of rate limit issues. But that's where this, I think, first came from. And we'll show, it's really neat because it has an administration feed. Oh, I was going to go to this too. So this is where the solution is documented, so you can walk through. It'll talk at a high level, so we can register resources for our user group attendees to use, or whatever, if we're doing a workshop, whatnot, behind the scenes. So I can say, hey, here's an AI search resource you can use. Here's a DALL-E resource to generate images. When we go in and register them, I can set explicit rate limits in here as well that are on top of what Azure's rate limits already are. So if I say, hey, I don't want somebody at my user group to be able to query this more than once per minute, we can do that. It's pretty neat. You can register events, so you can have multiple events to see what attendees are registered where. So if you want to roll out multiple events, you can start and stop these. So if you want to have an online event, for example, you can put a date range where somebody can register, and then where the event is no longer valid. So all those tokens that people are generating to be able to query your API then go out of sync. They're not able to be used anymore. And this is part of the max token cap. We can set a daily request cap, all that sort of fun stuff in here. And then you can even have some event pages and whatnot. Attendees can register. You can see what they will view. They log in through GitHub. So this uses their GitHub identity to get a token from you, so that they don't have to necessarily sign up for an Azure account, as long as they have a GitHub account, which most developers, I would say, if not all, have a GitHub account of some sort. They can do that. They can authenticate with the proxy. They get a key that is unique to them, and an endpoint that they could call, or also the playground. If you're an organizer, some people really like numbers to see, who did what and where. You can see who used what, how people registered, how the requests looked over time, all that sort of fun stuff if you want to look at it. Capacity, you can also mess with. The playground, I think, is the next coolest piece. It gives people a website. So we'll roll into that. So if we go to the playground, this is a playground. So if you register for the event, it gives you an API key that you can then put up in here. You can then select any models. You can play with temperature, all that sort of stuff, and basically play with your own version of ChatGPT, or whatever model you put behind the scenes, right? If you use a DALL-E model, there will be a vision tab here too that you can generate images. This is really fun for when you're trying to teach people prompt engineering. So I think especially non-technical users. This isn't the workshop I was looking for. This one? Yeah. So this used to be the Azure, the OpenAI Foundation, I think it's what's called. I'm blanking on the name off the top of my head. But they rebranded it to the part of the Microsoft AI Tour. This is really good for basic prompt engineering. So if you want to teach somebody how to use prompting or be better at it, if maybe you haven't practiced a ton, this is a good way to do that. It's just a workshop. It's free. It's MIT. It's open source. You can use it, rebrand it with, Alex Company 123, and it's the same thing. This is a really great workshop because we talk about prompt engineering techniques. You learn about system messages. You learn about adding knowledge, so like giving it some context, function calling, creating images, all that sort of fun stuff. Oh, yeah, I can share the link to this. Here's the link to the workshop, and I believe it was on GitHub and MIT and open source. It's probably... They're not. I can find the link to Upler. I don't know where the additional resources maybe. No. This is on GitHub somewhere, or it's archived, but it would be probably this, right? That's how GitHub pages work. Yeah, it looks like it's probably this one, if I had to guess. Yeah, and it's MIT licensed. So that's a fun workshop I've given to a few people of like when they're trying to learn that. From an admin side, here's what that looks like with a real live thing. I can go ahead and create an event, do all that sort of fun stuff. This is all self-hosted in my Azure instance. I can give people explicit resources. Each resource, I can tell how I want it to authenticate and authorize. And then I can get reports here for what's going on. So I can watch semi-live what people are doing with all my resources, so I'm not surprised. And then it gives an API proxy too. Oops. If you want to talk to real developers of that are like maybe a little bit more advanced and are trying to build solutions, you can also give them a proxy API to hit. That key that it generates is good for the key in the SAS token, so they can use that to authenticate with this API endpoint and hit that up and try to build with AI. Any questions on that one? So this one is the knowledge mining solution accelerator. This seems fairly similar to the chat with your data a little bit. It just uses Cosmos to back your chat history, which is, I'm going to be honest, kind of an expensive way to do that, if we're being totally honest. For chat history, I typically do a blob table if I'm trying to do it for audit stuff in the future of like just trying to look after the fact, but Cosmos can be a pretty expensive way to do that if you want to. There's some other stuff in here as well. One thing that did kind of stink about this one, so what's the solution overview? The quick deployment guide, and this is kind of a common theme for these, is they'll tell you how to do this. They require all of these requirements, but the code space file that they have in here doesn't have those requirements installed. So it kind of makes it a little bit more difficult to deploy. I kind of skipped this one, so I didn't actually deploy this one because I ran into that. And then once you get past that, all of the deployment stuff is written assuming you're on a PC with PowerShell. So that also kind of was a bummer considering their code space opens up in a Linux workspace and then all of the other scripts are requiring you to use PowerShell. Yeah, I know it says PowerShell is available on Linux, but I don't want to put that on my Mac. But here's another solution. PC. Okay, Derek, I was waiting for that. Here's the other link for that. I didn't play with this one a ton just because it was kind of difficult with that. And I think there's some other cooler models out there. So there's some key features here. So if you're trying to extract extract real world entities, chat-based insight discovery, texture document data analysis, prompt suggestion, and then multimodal information processing. And here's kind of what that looks like when it's running out there. So you can have different filters, types of documents, chat with your data. If you want to chat with all your data or only parts of the data, you can do that. You can upload more stuff. It's a pretty cool solution. It's a little bit more robust than the chat with your data one we started with because you can be more selective on what documents you actually care about versus where you do the chat with your data one. Unless your prompt explicitly tells you what you're looking for, it will span all of your documents, which that could be an issue if you don't necessarily want to be spanning. For example, the first document or first example we had stuff like job functions. In this one, you could have a job functions folder, you could have like a HR material folder, you could have a insurance folder, and then be like, okay, I have a question on my role at my company or an HR thing. You could ask just that data versus maybe getting the model to come back with data that you don't care about, right? If I'm asking an insurance question, I don't care what job function at my company um, negotiates insurance rates or something weird like that, right? Like I want to know what my health plan covers. And depending on how it's worded or how it comes back, you could potentially get back that data. So this one's a little bit more of a surgical way to do that. And that's kind of what I talked about. The issues, the code space isn't quite set up, and it assumes that you're running on a PC to run this one, which is a little bit, which stinks. But any questions on that one? If not, we'll keep rolling. And this might not take the whole time, so if you do have questions, feel free to type them in the chat, come off mute, do whatever. This may not take the whole time. Just FYI. So this one is a multi-agent custom automation engine solution. What does that mean? This is just a way to show how you could potentially use agent-to-agent communication and basically start with real-life business use cases. So we'll start with that one. So here's what the architecture looks like. It looks simple compared to some of the other ones we have, and we'll see why that is in a minute. That's what the UI is. So the key features of this one is allowing people to focus on what matters, enabling Gen AI to scale. We'll talk about that. Applicable to most industries, quote. And then efficient task automation. This one does have a dev container and a code space file. So this one is actually really slick to deploy. If you have a GitHub account, you can just do the login and then AZD up. One thing I will say is some of these solutions that I forgot about talking about is they require a Postgres database. And by default, Azure likes to, when you do your AZD, try to throw you in US East. US East is at capacity for Postgres, so it won't actually let you spin up more. US Central is where a lot of these things kind of worked, where there was still an AI instance and there's still a Postgres capacity, so you can just spin up the database for some of these. Just something when I was working through this that I ran into. There is also a local setup on this one, so if you want to run it locally, you can totally do that too. And we'll roll into that one. This one's a little bit fun. So if we actually look, there is the idea behind this is kind of a multi-agent kind of system. So what that means is I have a task here. We have a few different ones. For example, like onboard an employee, Jessica Smith. Then we have different agents that specialize in different things. So we have an HR agent, for example, that we'll talk through here. So if I click onto here, my agent then said, hey, we use two different ones. There is an orchestrator agent, and then there's the planner agent. So the orchestrator, and then there's the HR agent. So we want to initiate a background check. So there's a function here called initiate background check. We can do that. So you see I initiated that request, but we can go through here. The background HR agent returned once it's complete. So that task is done in this stage. And you can go on through here, request to set up payroll. So the HR agent. And the idea here is to show kind of, granted, all these requests today are mocked, but theoretically you could have a developer come and implement these features. So for example, if you have a system that does your background checks, that checkbox or that task could make an API call out that says, okay, if you use like Workday or any of those kind of tools, okay, Workday, go fetch me a background check. All right, go make out the setup payroll. So whatever our payroll software is, go make an entry into there for Jessica Smith. Okay, go make an API call out to security or put a task on their ticket or however they do work for generating them a ID card. All right, for configure laptop, maybe you put an IT service desk request in to request them a laptop. A lot of places have automation for that kind of stuff. And if you notice here, we just got our tech support agent. So that one is slightly different than HR. So tech support agent, we told it to, hey, do this job function. The planner agent smart enough to say, which is the group chat planner, to say, hey, this one is a tech support job or function. HR agent kind of just takes its seat back, doesn't do anything. And then we can set up an office account for her. And we'll also see that that is also the tech support agent. So you can kind of start working through the high level workflow. Granted, this checkbox isn't super valuable, but I think once you document the steps out, you can slowly start automating pieces of this, right? So then, okay, if I'm in HR and I'm onboarding a new employee, I can potentially kick this over to IT sooner, so you don't have somebody coming into work on the first day where maybe they haven't even requested all the right stuff, to start getting them an ID badge, start getting them Office 365 access, start all those processes can start to be automated so that people can focus on the things that actually matter instead of I don't know about you guys. I've been at a few places where it's like, hey, like just a second, we have to call IT. And IT's like, when's this person coming? And they're like, oh, they're already here. And they have to drop what they're doing, whether it's important or not, to start setting them up accounts and saying, okay, shoot, we gotta get them onboarded. We can also do new tasks here. So draft a press release too. So we can have different agents. If we hit go, and then there's also, this does take a minute. We'll queue up a few other tasks too. Any questions while this is loading? So what this is showing is how to do agent-to-agent communication, essentially. It's doing semantic kernel, but it has what's called a group chat agent. So that's like your planner, who's basically the main orchestrator. And then you have a bunch of other custom-built agents underneath there. So your natural language question goes into essentially the orchestrator. The orchestrator then passes the request on to the agent's tool that it thinks best suits what it's being asked. So if we go into here, get info about our products, and then write a press release. So we said, hey, go write a press release for us. Generated a plan with 2 steps. So we first need to get info. So that could be a API call. Maybe it's release notes. Maybe it's so if you're at a company that maybe needs release notes for everything, maybe you could go and fetch your GitHub commits or your backlog items and fetch the descriptions programmatically. So you could say, hey, go do that. So we'll get it all. Let that call out to a agent. There it goes. So we have all these information of all of our products and phone plans. And then we could have the function of generate a press release. In that PR example or release note example, you could do that for, hey, I'm going to get all my release notes or get all of my PR commits or backlog items, and then use that to then generate, hey, I want to create maybe a change log or a diff or something like that I have to publish due to some sort of compliance reason. Ben asked, been looking through these links. Are there any examples that use .NET Aspire bonus points if they're Olama or local dev, F5 and Go, and deployment to Azure with cognitive services or otherwise? I think by default, a lot of these are first built out in Python. Then they kind of go backwards for .NET. They also, the goal is to use, I think, models as a service. So a lot of these do use the GPT models, which can't be run locally today. So I don't think there is any examples that use the full local development. A lot of them, even when they are local development, it's you can run this locally, but it's still calling out to Azure. So you're still authenticated to Azure, calling out to deployed services. You should be able to just find all of those calls or queries though, and change them out. That is going to require some legwork. I would be curious though with how GitHub Copilot Agent Mode has been working. If you found one of the more simple ones, if you could just say, hey, go and change this over to .NET or try to do an Aspire one. Because this one, I believe, trying to go down. Was this the right? Yeah. Difficulty, business value. I thought this one had documentation on, yeah, right here. So it uses semantic kernel, if I recall correctly, behind the scenes. So semantic kernel supports .NET and Python. If you were like, hey, sidecar a semantic kernel in C# instance, I think it would be the same. And then you could just change the back end and to whatever, and then point it to the front end to the new back end. I don't know if they use .NET Aspire though. That'd be something else that you'd probably have to start spinning up. Let's see, is there any issues that say that? Trying to see if there's any. I don't see anything here that says that they're moving to that. That could be potentially an issue or a feature request that you'd want to do as well. That you could open up on this and say, hey, really love to see this in Aspire or .NET. I believe, I could be wrong. This also might be using MCP behind the scenes as well. But yeah, there's all sorts of buzzwords and things changing that I think if you request, hey, I would really like to see this, they can at least get it on their list or maybe even build it out. This one is agents for enhanced customer care. So the idea of this one is to truly be a like tier 1 support bot. And this is supposed to be a low code, no code type of solution as well. Because of that, we can just skip to the last slide. This is complicated and requires extra licenses, and you'll see because it requires Dataverse and Copilot Studio. Dataverse is a paid service, and so is Copilot in Dynamics 365. So there's quite a few paid services here, but if these are tools that you use today at your organization, this might be something that could just jump right in. So we can do a customer contacts your company, whether that's voice SMS channels that goes through Azure Communication Services, then gets dumped to Copilot Studio, or if it's text, it goes straight to Copilot Studio. There's also some pro code extensions here. So this is how they're trying to show a low code, no code developer can also interact with a professional developer is kind of what, or I think that's the phrasing they use. So that you can then match the two together so you can have extra extensions. That's what like this is kind of showing is, hey, maybe we have some Power Automate or other connectors that are feeding into here that can then go into Dynamics. So Dynamics could say, hey, here's the conversation with handoffs, sentiment, case management, all that sort of fun stuff that can go to the customer service rep who can also then get data out of the Dataverse. Then that also can then plug in back to Copilot in 365 so that they can use that to prompt, potentially grab all the information they need, get back to the agent itself or get back to the person itself, supplement it with other line of business applications and data sources, and then use that through the Copilot Studio UI so that they don't necessarily have to build out a full UI to do case management. It's designed to be easily customizable, all that. There is a quick deploy, so they also do still have this. It just requires some some Copilot Studio setup, which is not something I use very often, so that kind of scared me away for setting that up. But if you're using that in Dynamics and all that, you can also see there's a mobile phone number you can mess with here as well. It looks like Derek might have found one we can talk about here in a sec. Update custom contact, all that sort of fun stuff. This one, again, if you're playing in this space and you've already used all this, here's an example of it working. So somebody can call, ask a question, and then they can get some extra information off the person for the request. But yeah, this one's kind of fun. If you're using kind of a low code, no code plus a pro developer solution, you can do all that here. Derek just shared this one. What is this? An AI app template that uses C# application that is using .NET Aspire, it looks like. So this must be just like a very basic project.
Yeah, I was just trying to search for some. We've got an internal site that lists a bunch, and I was trying to search on .NET Aspire one, so I found two of them here that has .NET Aspire.
So this one looks like it gives you a little bit of a UI in .NET Aspire to call with. It uses Azure Cognitive Services through a managed identity. So if you wanted to be local, I assume you just build a branch here for your containers. Assuming there's a local way to run this as well. There's a dev container. Deploying with AZD, run the application. .NET run, yeah. So I think you should be able to run this locally as well. You just might have to put some if local checks in here, and then you can chat with your data locally. And then the other one you shared was this one. Creative Writing Assistant working with agents using Semantic Kernel and .NET Aspire. Azure OpenAI. Yeah, and again, I think you would just hear this piece to call the Azure OpenAI. You would make a request to your like Olama instance, and that shouldn't be, knock on wood, terribly difficult to swap out. From what I've seen, because for the most part, these are just API calls. So instead of calling out to there, you can call out to your local instance. Looks like you're running some notebook extensions. Try to see. Evaluating the results. GPT-4o and embedding. So it is using an embedding model of some sort to do the vectorization. So you might need to have an embedding model running locally as well. But other than that, I think you should be able to run these locally. Sweet. And like I said, even the Python ones, I know I had somebody else I was talking to about this, and they were like, gross, it's Python. I'm like, yeah, but the way the development structure has been for a lot of stuff is I think Python gets a lot of the first releases, or maybe they go in tandem, but it's like tested out in Python. Um, I don't know, Douglas. Python is a polarizing topic, but since they're both using the same core library of semantic kernel, and with the AI agent stuff, I don't think the conversion would be horribly terrible if you wanted to move it to .NET, just because you're using the same packages behind the scenes. Uh, you should be able to just say, hey, rewrite this in .NET, and hopefully that'd be a close to one-to-one conversion. Or at least AI would be able to assist you to make it like maybe a half an hour thing instead of having to fully rewrite some of these systems. But yeah, I know you're a big Python fan, Douglas. Any other questions? Any one of those projects anybody wants to dig deeper into? Any of that sort of stuff? Okay. I'm going to stop the recording.